A predator isn't born overnight. There's always a rehearsal, a deliberate, chilling practice of violation. In this analysis, we're going to deconstruct that critical moment when Daniel LaPlante consciously decided to stop being a disturbed teenager and start becoming a methodical predator, honing the very skills he would use for the terror that was to come.
The courts themselves really frame this narrative for us. We are not looking at what they call the hallmark features of a juvenile, immaturity, impulsivity. No. As this key finding from the Supreme Judicial Court states, we are analyzing a series of calculated, goal-driven actions. This is the story of intent. So to really understand the actions, we have to try to understand the mind behind them. This first section is going to examine the clinical diagnosis of Daniel LaPlante, the psychological framework that was already in place just before he crossed his most violent thresholds. As we talked about in our last explainer, LaPlante's early history was just filled with stalking and boundary testing, creeping into homes, tormenting families from inside their own walls. But these weren't just chaotic acts. They were symptoms, really. Precursors to a formal diagnosis that helps explain the cold rationale behind his behavior. This psychiatric testimony from a Dr. Saleh is absolutely crucial here. He concluded that LaPlante's crimes didn't just come out of nowhere. They stemmed from this specific clinical diagnosis, conduct disorder. Now, this reframes everything. Suddenly, we're not just talking about a troubled childhood or, youthful recklessness. We're talking about a persistent, pathological disregard for the rights of other human beings. And this brings us right to the core of today's analysis. That transition from dark thoughts to dark deeds, it isn't an accident. It isn't a snap decision. For LaPlante, it was a conscious choice, a threshold he deliberately chose to step over. He was moving from a passive obsession with control to an active, physical intrusion into people's lives. Okay, so this kind of escalation requires tools. Before a predator can truly act, they have to prepare. This section breaks down LaPlante's methodical acquisition of the very means to turn his fantasies into a lethal reality. Just look at the timeline here. This is not random. This is a sequence, a clear progression. October 14th, he steals 2 handguns. When his stepfather finds one, does he panic? No. LaPlante calmly lies about where he got it. And then he actively goes out and finds ammunition. Every single step is deliberate, it's deceptive, and it builds on the last, all of it culminating in his first intrusion into the Gustafson home. That Pendel burglary on October 14th, that was a pivotal moment. The goal wasn't just cash. It was about acquiring lethal force. He stole 2.22 caliber Ruger handguns. And that act fundamentally changed the nature of his intrusions. He was no longer just a voyeur or a petty thief. He now had the instruments for ultimate control. So once he was armed, LaPlante's focus shifted. See, having the tools, that wasn't the end goal. It was just the beginning. The next logical step in his predatory sequence was rehearsal, testing his ability to violate a chosen space, to dominate a territory, before he tried to dominate the people inside it.
Now, we're going to analyze the intrusions themselves. And it's so critical to understand that these burglaries, they were not simple crimes of opportunity. Not at all. They were methodical rehearsals, practice runs for the psychological and physical domination that he craved.
Here we can see the 2 very distinct phases of his preparation. The Pendel intrusion was all about acquiring power, getting the guns. The Gustafson burglary, though, that was a territorial rehearsal. Yeah, he stole stuff, but the deeper function was to learn the space, to feel a sense of ownership over it, to practice the act of violation itself. The court's own words really highlight the critical choice he made. While he could have stopped there, he decided to return. You see? This wasn't just momentum. It was a conscious decision. The rehearsal had been a success, and it made him bolder. The choice to go back, that was the final confirmation of his intent. So, we've seen the methodical what. Now we turn to the chilling why. What kind of psychological frameworks can possibly explain a mind that doesn't just fantasize about terror, but actively, meticulously rehearses it? Think about it. For most of us, breaking into a home would be terrifying. The risk of getting caught, the fear, it's a powerful deterrent, right? But what if your brain is just wired differently? What is it that drives a person not just to accept risk, but to actually seek it out for stimulation?
The field of neurocriminology offers a pretty chilling biological explanation. Imagine your brain is constantly understimulated, just perpetually bored. Well, for some people, this chronic underarousal creates a physiological need for intense experiences. For them, dangerous acts aren't just a thrill, they actually provide a neurological jolt that brings them up to what feels like a normal level of arousal.
And this biological component is paired with a truly chilling cognitive ability. As Dr. Stanton Samino describes it, it's the capacity to simply turn off fear. That internal alarm system that stops most people, for them, it doesn't just fail to ring, it's deliberately silenced. The predator is in complete control of their own fear response. So when you start to synthesize all these ideas, a very clear and disturbing profile emerges. First, his behavior was instrumental. Every action was a calculated means to an end, not some emotional outburst. He was systematically violating boundaries, just testing the limits of intrusion. This was all being driven by a deep fixation on control over his victims and control over their environment. And he was able to do it all with this profound emotional detachment, completely devoid of the empathy or the conscience that would stop you or me. This is the blueprint of a predator in training.
So you see, these were not isolated events. Each step, acquiring the tools, testing the territory, and cognitively just shutting off fear, it was all part of a single horrifying process, the final rehearsal for his ultimate crimes. This was the final definitive shift. Voyeurism became physical intrusion, stalking escalated to direct domination, and abstract planning, it evolved into a terrifyingly real rehearsal. He had crossed the line from the world of dark fantasy into the world of violent action.
He had practiced. He had armed himself. He had confirmed his own capability for violation, without fear and without remorse. The rehearsal was over. The performance was about to begin.